On September 23, 1998, 19-year-old Amber Wilde, a college student who was 4.5 months pregnant, called her father after getting into a minor car accident near the University of Wisconsin at Green Bay. Later that evening, she spoke with him one last time from her apartment landline, but the next day, she never showed up for class or her doctor's appointment. A week later, her car was found abandoned near Lambeau Field with her keys inside and her purse locked in the trunk. But Amber was nowhere to be found. More than 27 years later, Amber's disappearance remains unsolved. Detectives believe she was murdered, but without her body, they've never been able to prove it. Her family is still searching, waiting for the answers that will finally bring Amber home. Hey everyone, welcome back to Detective Perspective. My name is Derrick Levasseur. I'm a licensed private investigator and former police detective. Each week I'll be covering an unsolved case in story format. I'll then give you my perspective on the investigation and provide contact information for the individuals or organizations connected to the case so that if you have any tips, you can contact them directly and maybe you can help solve a case. So if you're someone who's interested in true crime, specifically unsolved cases, and you would like to hear my opinion on those investigations, please consider subscribing whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever platform you use. Well, hello everyone. Nice to see you all. Long time no see. I do apologize. This episode is coming to you late this week. That is 100% my fault. I have a few different things I want to talk about, some life updates, also a new criminal coffee announcement. And if you want to skip past that, I'm sure someone in the comments will put the timestamp in there. I won't delete it. I won't comment on it. Feel free to do it. Some of you are here for just the case, completely understand it. You can skip forward. For anybody who wants to know what's going on in my life, where I am right now, you can stay tuned and I'm going to give you the updates. I like sharing it with you guys. I feel like your family and I feel like you have a right to know the things that are going on and where I currently stand in life, just like many of you out there. We all got things going on. I'm no exception. So first thing, Tenley, my oldest, just had tonsil surgery on Monday. For anybody who knows, as you get older, it gets more difficult. So she's currently in bed. I'm with her every day. A lot of pain, but she's in the 5th day of it now. So she's doing better. Somebody's with her right now so I can record this. But I've been by her side. I was actually bawling my eyes out when they gave her the anesthesia. I don't know why, but just like the most horrific thing to watch ever. And I was saying to the nurses, like, why am I crying right now? But even like talking about it right now makes me emotional. I'm such a baby. But she's doing good. She's healing up. She's at home resting. That was number one. Number two, I recently moved. It was a big move. Anybody who's moved before, you know, it can be a lot, especially when you have a family. So that was a big undertaking. I'm currently living out of boxes. I've also had an issue with my knee that I'm dealing with. It seems like I've always got a health issue, which I guess is part of getting old. I had surgery 12 years ago. I had MRSA in my knee, almost lost my knee. And now I'm having some issues with like the ligaments and tendons and I'm starting PRP treatment for it. Nervous about it, not fun. I tried the cortisone shot. It did not work at all. So I'm struggling to get around. I'm kind of hobbling, but there's people dealing with a lot worse things. So I'm not going to complain. I'm going to get through it. It's part of life. You got to keep rolling. And then also, we had a criminal coffee announcement. I can't even remember if I announced it on this channel yet. I'm going to say it again if I haven't. We solved our second case for criminal coffee, Joanne Zamora. Big win. We did a whole episode on it on Crime Weekly. Go check it out. It's a really fascinating episode to watch because I brought my genealogist in and we talked about how the case was solved. And we also offered our services to a couple of our listeners or viewers. If you have some family makeup where you're looking for genetic genealogy investigations to be conducted, we might select you and do it for free, just to show you what we're capable of. And then, speaking of criminal coffee, as you can see, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm wearing our new merch drop. I'll put a picture up right here. This is the front side of it. It's little fingerprint bats. The back is awesome as well. I'll kind of spin around here. You can kind of see it. but I'll throw an image up so you can see it. And in conjunction with the merch drop, we just dropped our new pumpkin spice criminal coffee. It's delicious. And the bag is pretty awesome. If you look at it, shout out to Ashley for designing it. She did another great job, knocked it out of the park. Our sweatshirt sold out in one day. We got more coming. That was something I was dealing with. We got more coming. We're getting a rush on them, so they should be here soon. So if you're someone who's seeing this and you want one, just click on the sweatshirt and then there's a notify me when available option. And as soon as they come in, you'll get an email so you're notified. So that's kind of the update. I'm giving the abbreviated version. I don't want to spend too much time on this. That's a major reason why the episode was late this week. I tell you guys all the time, I could kick these out in a couple hours. Sitting down and recording, you could just go through it and you could just breeze through it and not really put the time into it. I would much rather put the episode out later in the week and invest the time that I need to do it right than to put it out early and just to be, consistent and not give 100% of what I'm capable of. I'm definitely happy to report as I sit here right now, I've never done that on a case. I always treat each case as if it was my own family member. There have been cases where I've talked to Shannon afterwards and said, man, I wish I would have included that. But that's just how it goes sometimes, especially after hearing back from you guys. But every case that I've covered here on this channel, I've always given it everything I have. And tonight's case with Amber Wilde is no exception. I've had the time to research it. I've looked up things online. I've done an extensive search on the current status of the case and where we can go from here. And I feel good about it now. And now that I feel like I'm in a place to report on it, that's what I'm going to do. But I can't promise this won't happen again, especially through the holidays. I'm going away for Disney. I'm trying to get it all done. Again, for some of you, it won't matter. You're here for the cases and the cases will come out when they come out. But for those of you who are interested in my life, and I've met a lot of you over the years, I feel like we know each other at this point. You guys are my friends. You guys are my family. You have a right to know. All good stuff, not complaining about anything. It's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. So I'm in a good place. I hope you are as well. Unfortunately, we're not here for the best circumstances. We never are, which brings us to tonight's case. Amber's case is 27 years old at this point. The anniversary of Amber's disappearance just passed about a week ago. And I saw an article that came out about it, and it was marking the date that this whole thing happened. And it was basically 6 short sentences. That was it. And right then and there, when I read that, I was like, okay, this case needs more attention. That's what solidified it for me. And I'm like, we got to do a deep dive. We got to cover it. We got to talk about it because that's not enough. And if it's been 27 years and that's all we have, something's got to change. And one of the first things we can do is get exposure on it, make more people aware of it, because not everybody listening tonight will know Amber Wilde's story, and you should. So we're going to talk about it. And this is a case where it could be just the obvious, what I'm going to lay out to you, but it could also be something that we're completely unaware of, a person that we haven't identified yet. And maybe that's why it's unsolved. So we definitely have a lot to cover. There's a lot of research involved with this case, a lot of information, and I want to make sure that I get to all of it. So let's dive into this week's case. Amber Lynn Wilde was born on March 26, 1979 in Wisconsin to her parents Steve and Julie. She was around 6 years old when her parents separated. Amber and her younger sister split time between both houses, but when Amber reached high school, she moved in with her father full-time. In 1997, Amber, who was known for being friendly, smart, and driven, graduated from high school. She went on to attend community college where she earned a full scholarship and began studying pre-medicine with the goal of one day becoming a pediatrician. Instead of taking the usual 2 years to complete her associate's degree, Amber pushed herself to finish in just one, graduating in the spring of 1998. And that fall, she planned to transfer to the University of Wisconsin at Green Bay to continue her education and work towards her bachelor's degree. According to the Charlie Project, around the time she completed her associates, Amber met Matt Schneider at a house party. She later told her aunt that Matt was a, quote, burly 6'5", 21-year-old highway construction worker. At first, Amber's family thought the relationship seemed fine. But in August, Amber learned she was pregnant, and when Matt found out, he became cold. As it turned out, he was already engaged to another woman named Heidi, and he didn't want his fiancée to learn about the affair. Amber told her family that while the pregnancy was unplanned, she wanted to keep the baby, even if it meant raising the child alone. Her family fully supported her decision, and her aunt even offered to help with childcare so Amber could continue school. Still, Amber wanted the baby's father to be involved. She asked Matt repeatedly to play a role in the baby's life, but he refused. So Amber continued with the pregnancy on her own. By early September, she had moved into her own apartment at 2046 August Street in Green Bay and began classes at the university. According to True Crime Daily, in mid-September, she had a doctor's appointment which confirmed she was about 4.5 months pregnant and due in February of 1999. Now, I do want to make a note here that during the research process, there were some sources that stated she was 6 months pregnant, but based on the timeline that we have and when she would have met Matt, that can't be true. So we're sticking with the 4.5 months pregnant. It makes much more sense based on what we do know. So then, on September 23rd, Amber called her dad Steve and told him that she had been in a minor car accident near the university. She explained that she had rear-ended another vehicle and she actually hit her head on the windshield during the accident. Amber said she had a bad headache, so she went to the university clinic. Medical staff there believed she had a concussion and advised that someone check on her throughout the rest of the day. Steve called her multiple times to check in, with the last conversation taking place at 7:16 p.m. on Amber's apartment landline. Now, during that call, Steve told her that he would call again the next morning to make sure she was awake and ready for her 1 p.m. class. Tragically, it would be the last time Steve ever heard from his daughter. The following morning, September 24th, he called again to see how Amber was feeling, but she didn't answer. He continued calling with no success, and when Amber failed to attend both her class and scheduled optometrist appointment, Steve became increasingly concerned. According to the Charlie Project, Steve then drove an hour and a half to Green Bay and found Amber's apartment door locked. He had his own key, so he went inside, but when he didn't see any signs of a struggle. What he did notice was that both Amber's purse and her car was missing. And it didn't make sense to him that she would leave without telling him, so he called the police. But officers told him that he needed to wait 48 hours before filing a missing persons report. And I've talked about this a million times. My stance will not change on it. There are processes in place where you can't officially report someone missing into NCIC until 48 hours, unless there's clear signs of foul play or that something went wrong. However, these are always the cases where I would like to know what was going on behind the scenes other than reporting it to NCIC, because as I've said before, you could say to someone, hey, we can't put them officially into the system, but we're going to help you out. We're going to make some calls. We're going to drive by some locations. We're going to see if we can find her before that, just to ease your mind and ensure that she's okay. Even if it means us just calling her and her telling us, yeah, I'm okay, but I don't want to be found right now. I just want to be alone. As an adult, she has the right to do that. So you as a police officer can do both. You can respect the person's privacy while also letting her family know that she's okay. So I would really want to dive into this and find out what actions the officers took, because if it was simply, yep, sorry, can't help you, have a good day, they're wrong. That's a problem. It should never happen. Yes, there's a process, but you also still have a responsibility. And if someone comes to you and says, my loved one is missing and this is not normal behavior, and you don't act on that, you're failing to do your job. It's that simple. It's that cut and dry. So fast forward to September 26th, Steve was finally able to report Amber missing, but it still didn't seem like the police were taking the situation seriously. They didn't even meet with him at Amber's apartment until September 30th, which was 4 days later. And at this point, Amber had been missing for a full week. I don't think I need to say it, but I will. Completely unacceptable. Not knowing what happened to Amber as we sit here right now, no one can dispute the fact that there's a strong possibility that she was still alive for an extended period of time while the officers were deciding whether this was serious or not. If they had acted sooner, is it possible that Amber would still be alive to this day? Yes. And is it possible that she still is alive out there somewhere? Of course. But as time progresses, I think we can all agree that becomes less and less likely. However, there was a real fork in the road here, especially in that 48-hour time period where officers could have made a real difference. Now, is there a possibility that she was dead within hours? Yes, that's also possible, but we'll never know because the officers waited over a week as far as I can tell, before they really did something. And that's a major no-no, and I don't understand how that happens. There's a chain of command there, and you can have an officer at the lower level who doesn't do his job, but what about the supervisors? What are they doing? This is the problem, and this is the issue I face with a lot of these cases where you're going to see a pattern. It's not always the situation, but there are circumstances where I would not be covering these cases if the officers did their job. And we never really know which ones those cases are until we find out what happened. So I can't say with 100% certainty that's the case here, but I shouldn't be asking that question in the first place. If they did their job in a timely manner, this wouldn't be a topic of conversation, and yet here we are discussing it again, and it pisses me off the same amount every single time. So when detectives finally arrived, they asked Steve for more information about his daughter. He explained that Amber was 4.5 months pregnant and believed that the father was Matt Schneider. He also told them about her recent car accident, though investigators ultimately didn't think it was connected to her disappearance. Now, from what I can gather, that was something that they eventually arrived at, but it wasn't their initial assessment. I guess they did look into it, but as the investigation progressed and they did what they had to do, they determined that the accident wasn't connected to her disappearance. While detectives were at the apartment, they conducted a search and collected DNA and fingerprints. They also discovered that Amber's diary was hidden under her mattress. And this diary, it became a key piece of evidence because Amber had chronicled nearly every detail of her life, her daily activities, who she spoke to, and her most private thoughts. The diary entries have never been released publicly. However, when True Crime Daily covered Amber's story, they were allowed to see some of them. It is important to note that everything I'm about to describe was corroborated through other forms of evidence, including phone records and witness statements. In other words, these weren't just pages from a personal journal, they represented verifiable facts. So let's take a quick break, and then I want to walk you through each diary entry. Okay, so I'm really excited about this first sponsor because it's not something I often talk about on this channel, and that's finances. I think we all have concerns about the future and where it's going, and we're doing our best to protect ourselves and make sure that we're set up for the future. And that involves diversifying your portfolio, having money in CDs, bank accounts, mutual funds, IRAs, whatever it might be for you. And that's a lot of paper money. You know, it's in these accounts somewhere, you know it exists, but you can't really touch it. And that's why I also think it's important to have some tangible assets like gold. And now buying gold is simple. You see, owning gold used to be complicated. I remember buying my first small gold bar in Texas was not an easy process, and you had to have the money up front. But now Acre Gold has made that whole process very simple. All you have to do is step 1, pick a subscription plan that fits your budget. Step 2, make small automatic monthly payments, no huge upfront costs. And step 3, which is the most fun part, once you've built up enough, Acre Gold will ship you Swiss-made, certified 24-karat gold bars straight to your door, discreetly and securely. That's it. No guesswork, just steady accumulation of real wealth. And they've had customers who have been subscribers for over 5 years because accumulating gold doesn't go out of style. And with the market always going up and down and fluctuating, it's never a bad thing to have gold in your possession. And for those of you who don't know, gold has been on an absolute tear with its price rising over 40% in the last year. So the best time to subscribe is now. Stop working for your money and make your money work for you. Go to getacregold.com to sign up. Once again, that's getacregold.com to sign up now. All right, we're back. Amber's first entries about Matt dated back to May 20th and 21st, 1998. She wrote that they had met at a house party, and afterward, they went back to her place where they had consensual sex. From there, the sexual relationship continued. True Crime Daily reported that Amber was, quote, very graphic about their relationship, and that it was, quote, very clear that this was no one-night stand. By mid-August, Amber wrote about learning she was pregnant with Matt's baby. She said she had shared the news with him, but he was far from happy. He immediately pressured her to have an abortion. Amber made it clear in her diary that she would never do that. She wanted to keep her child, and continued asking Matt to be part of the baby's life, but he always refused, instead saying she needed to get an abortion. Amber also wrote about urging Matt to tell his fiancée Heidi about the pregnancy, but he wouldn't. So Amber ended up telling her herself on August 23rd. She additionally wrote a letter to Matt's mother, and those actions made him furious. He told Heidi and his parents that Amber was making everything up. Then he gave Amber an ultimatum. Either she had an abortion, or he would harm himself or the baby. Amber refused, and in the 2 weeks leading up to her disappearance, she wrote that Matt kept trying to meet up with her in person. Now, further details about this haven't been released, so it's unclear if she ever met up with him. The only other thing we know about Amber's diary is that her last entry was on September 23rd, just hours before she got into that car crash. Details about that entry have never been released. And this is so fascinating because essentially what we have here is the victim is also the key witness in her own case. Like, she knows the details up to the very hours before she disappeared, and she's giving us a firsthand account of the relationships she currently had with certain people in her life, one of them being Matt. And I don't think I'm going out on a ledge here by saying the relationship was not good between her and Matt, and the fact that he would even threaten to harm the baby doesn't make me too fond of him. Now, just for legal purposes, I will say I did not hear him say this. We're only going off what Amber reported in her journal, but I pose this question to you. And I know I have a large female audience. I know I have a lot of males who also keep journals. How often do you lie in your own journal, which is only supposed to be seen by you? What would be the relevance there? Unless you had this premeditated plan to disappear and you wanted law enforcement to find this diary after the fact and clearly pointed at one specific person. Possible, highly unlikely, but possible. So for me, I believe what's written in the diary. I think it's all true. I don't think Amber ever intended for anybody to see it. And therefore, she's going to give her true feelings and thoughts, not only on certain situations, but also her account of what transpired between her and other individuals, including Matt. So the fact that she wrote this in her diary, I believe it to be true, just my personal opinion. And I do find it interesting that this guy, who essentially wanted nothing to do with Amber after they had sex and was basically trying to separate himself from her as much as possible because he was engaged to another woman, suddenly had this urge to meet up with her in person. And I know what you're all thinking. I'm thinking it as well. And if I had the opportunity, I would ask Matt to his face, why? Why did you want to meet up with her so much? And then my second question would be, did it ever happen? I would love to hear his responses to those two questions. It may answer a lot for us. So after going through Amber's apartment, detectives went to speak with Matt, who was working in the Sean O area at the time. His crew was in the process of upgrading State 29, a stretch of highway running about 90 miles from Green Bay to Wausau. When asked about Amber, Matt claimed he barely knew her, saying that they had met once at a restaurant and spoke maybe twice. He insisted that they never had sex. But he had no alibi for the night of September 23rd, and detectives noted he showed, quote, no concern for the fact that Amber was missing. His only focus was on repeating that he had never slept with her. Before leaving the worksite, detectives also spoke with Matt's coworker and close friend, Nick Pettit. Nick told them he didn't have any info, but his girlfriend Sarah may have seen Amber driving her silver Subaru in Wausau, which is about 95 miles from Green Bay. He even provided what detectives described as, quote, a detailed description of her vehicle. And as you might expect, that immediately raised red flags because at that point, investigators had not publicly released any information about Amber's car. They had no explanation for how Nick or his girlfriend would have known what kind of car she drove. According to True Crime Daily, detectives also interviewed Matt's fiancée Heidi. When asked about Matt's whereabouts on September 23rd, Heidi simply said she couldn't remember what he had told her he had been doing that night. So, translation, he had no solid alibi. She also went on to claim that Amber, quote, had an almost fatal attraction to Matt and insisted that she was making up the story about their relationship. She even said that Amber had been harassing Matt. After conducting all of these interviews, detectives reviewed Amber's phone records, and they discovered that after speaking to her dad at 7:16 p.m. on the 23rd, she received another call. She then left her apartment and never returned again. Investigators have never revealed who that call came from. And I do want to put out there that some sources say it was the person Amber had rear-ended earlier in the day, while others have suggested the call came from Matt. Either way, we don't know for sure, but I think we can all agree that this piece of information is critical. And it does make me wonder, if it was a nothing burger, why hasn't law enforcement released who it was? I feel like there's some connection here, and it might be part of the reason they're honing in on specific people. But until they release that information, we'll never know. What we do know is that detectives also obtained Matt's phone records and quickly confirmed he had lied about not knowing Amber very well. The record showed that between the end of May and September 23rd, there were roughly 60 phone calls between them. And in the 2 weeks before she went missing, there were multiple calls from Matt to Amber. These calls directly corresponded with her diary entries about Matt wanting to meet up with her in person. So right here, we know Matt's lying. He was not being harassed. He was not being stalked by Amber. In fact, he was reaching out to her, and if we're to believe her diary entries, which are supported by the phone call records, he was trying to meet up with her in person. Why was that, Matt? If you wanted nothing to do with her and you barely knew her and you never had sex with her, why are you calling her so much? What's going on there? And that's not even the most important part that we gathered from his phone records. It also showed that after September 23rd, Matt never tried to call her again. Now you may be saying, okay, well, he must have heard that she was missing and maybe that's why he never called again. But as I said earlier, police didn't even take this seriously until later that week. So let's just say 24 to 48 hours before anybody maybe heard rumblings that she was missing. And yet, Matt had been calling her consistently up to this date. But after she goes missing, and not many people know about it outside of Amber's family, Matt suddenly stops calling. Coincidence and extremely unfortunate timing for Matt? Or is it the key to the case? Again, not many people knew at this point that she was gone. Matt had been calling her consistently. The only people that would know she was missing at that point would be her father and whoever he told, law enforcement, especially just the couple people who were actually involved at that point, because again, it wasn't entered, there wasn't like this full-on search for her, and the person responsible for her disappearance. That's really it. We know that Matt wasn't part of the family and friends, and from what we've learned, nobody called him to ask if they knew where she was. Law enforcement hadn't disseminated any information on her at that point, so the only person or category left would be the individual or individuals involved in her disappearance. If Matt doesn't fit into the first two categories, then it would only leave the last one. And considering the relationship at that point, it's not looking good for him. So fast forward to October 1st, exactly 8 days after Amber disappeared, and her car, a silver four-door 1988 Subaru GL with front-end damage, was found in Green Bay. According to the FBI, the vehicle was abandoned in the parking lot of the 50-Yard Line Sports Bar and the Roadstar Inn near Lambeau Field on the south side of Lombardi Access Road. Now, I do want to note that I did look into both of these establishments and neither of them are there anymore, because my first question was, were there any cameras for the parking lot, for the establishment? Are we able to go back and look at that footage and see when that car was dumped there and potentially who exited that vehicle before dumping it there? Obviously, that would be key to this case. I can only imagine that even at the lowest level, regardless of the quality of detectives, that is something they would have done. I also think about Lambeau Field and what security systems they had in place in 1998. And you would think with all of this being around that at least one or two cameras would have been facing in the direction where the car was located. But because we're sitting here all these years later and nothing has ever been released, whether it's a screen grab or a video, this is just another one of those cases where the suspect either got lucky or they knew exactly what they were doing. Now, as far as the car itself, it was unlocked, and inside the vehicle her keys were in the ignition, her cell phone was on the seat, and her purse was locked in the trunk. Some of these details did match Amber's habits. She always kept her purse in the trunk, but others, they didn't make much sense. For example, Amber was only 5'5" tall and always drove with her seat pushed forward, yet when detectives found the vehicle, it was slid all the way back, which led them to believe that either someone adjusted the seat to throw them off, or the person driving the vehicle last was a very tall person, and before they got out of the vehicle, they weren't smart enough to move the seat forward again. Either way, in their opinion, they didn't think that Amber had left the car there or that she was the last person driving. Detectives also processed the car for fingerprints and DNA, and while doing so, they realized that just 2 days before she went missing, Amber got an oil change. And this was significant because the mileage at the time of the oil change was recorded and would give us some insight into how many miles this vehicle traveled from the time that Amber went missing to the time that it was found. And I will tell you, the number is extremely high. We're going to talk about it right after the break. So promoting cat food when I don't even have a cat, you would think that it's going to be hard, right? But so many people have spoken highly about Smalls cat food, including my sister, who I absolutely trust, that now I'm excited to share Smalls with you guys. And I never realized that the cat food my friends and family buy have so many bad ingredients, and I want to make sure that you know there are better options out there for you. So ask yourself, does your cat have gut issues? Do you want them to have a healthier, shinier coat? Or do you just want less stinky litter boxes? If you answered yes to any of those questions, maybe it's time for a diet upgrade with Smalls. And speaking of which, this podcast is sponsored by Smalls, and for a limited time, you can get 60% off your first order plus free shipping when you head to smalls.com/detective. Smalls cat food is protein-packed recipes with preservative-free ingredients you'd find right in your fridge, and it's delivered right to your doorstep. That's why Cats.com named Smalls their best overall cat food. And starting with Smalls is easy. Just share information about your cat's diet, health, and food preferences, and then Smalls puts together a personalized sampler for your cat, so no picking between random brands at the store. Smalls has the right food to satisfy any cat's cravings. Smalls was started back in 2017 by a couple of guys home cooking cat food in small batches for their friends. A few short years later, they've served over 1 million meals to cats across the U.S. Plus, Smalls works with the Humane World for Animals, and through the Humane World for Animals, they've donated over $1 million worth of food to help cats, and they even give you the chance to donate at checkout. So you can donate $5 for flea and tick medications or $7 for vaccines. And on top of all of that, now you can add other cat favorites like amazing treats and snacks to your small order as well. And just so you guys are aware, after switching to Smalls, 88% of cat owners reported overall health improvements. And obviously that's a big number, 88%. I'll take that. And the team at Smalls is so confident your cat will love their product that you can try it risk-free. That means you'll get a refund if your cat won't eat their food. So what are you waiting for? Give your cat the food they deserve. For a limited time, because you're a Detective Perspective listener or viewer, get 60% off your first order plus free shipping when you head to smalls.com/detective. One last time, that's 60% off your first order plus free shipping when you head on over to smalls.com/detective. Have you ever heard a true paranormal story that terrified you so much that it stuck with you for years? Well, Monsters Among Us podcast has thousands. Each week, Monsters Among Us brings you chilling stories from real people sharing their eerie experiences with the paranormal. From ghostly sightings to encounters with strange creatures, this show dives into the unknown and leaves you questioning everything you thought you knew. The tales are told in the witness's own voice from callers all around the world. Witnesses like Julie, who drove past a car accident only to realize a spirit had just joined her in the passenger seat. Or an anonymous caller who saw 3 strange entities in the woods moving in unison, then lost 8 hours without any explanation. Or Mac from Mississippi, who broke his back when he fell out of a tree stand, only to be nursed back to health by a sympathetic Sasquatch. Literally. These tales of the supernatural are carefully collected and curated by the host Derrick and shared in the form of audio recordings that get straight to the meat of each terrifying story. Derrick cultivates an atmosphere in equal parts spooky and nostalgic. The show is appropriate for all audiences, and with a back catalog of nearly 500 episodes, it's ready to binge. Listen to Monsters Among Us podcast now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, we're back, and before the break, I was talking about Amber getting her oil change done just days before her disappearance, and this brings up a topic that I cover here a lot, and it's that investigations can be demoralizing because in many instances, the ball doesn't fall your way, you're just unlucky, and a piece of information that could be critical to the case just doesn't get recorded or documented because of just an angle or a timing issue. However, sometimes you do get lucky, although it seems less frequent. It just feels that way. And this is one of those instances where her getting an oil change just days before her disappearance is a very big factor in this investigation because it allows you to get a reasonable understanding of how many miles her vehicle traveled after leaving her apartment. So how would you do that? Well, when she goes for the oil change, they're going to document the exact mileage. And from there, you can, through your investigation, learn where she traveled in the days leading up to her disappearance. And you can come to a reasonable estimate of what the mileage of her vehicle was at the time when she left her apartment. So you can see that she went to school or went to a friend's house or went to the market, whatever, through your investigation, through talking to witnesses, cameras, etc., you can figure it out. And from there, you can say, okay, I know how much mileage was on her vehicle at the time that she left on the 23rd. And then we have the vehicle here near Lambeau Field. How much mileage do we have now? And from what I can gather, that's exactly what detectives did. Now, I don't know how much they did as far as the investigation from the oil change to her disappearance to narrow down this number. All I know is that they reported the mileage on the car from the time of the oil change to the time her vehicle was found. And when they checked her odometer, they were able to determine that 600 unaccounted for miles had been recorded on the vehicle, suggesting that it had been driven extensively in the days after her disappearance. Now, what that exact number is, we don't know. And let's just estimate for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to give a big number that she traveled 200 miles from the time of her oil change to the time of her disappearance. And that's a big number. That's a lot of miles. Unless you're traveling back and forth to school or work and it's couple hours each way, you're not going to travel that much in a 2-day period. But let's just do it for the sake of this conversation. That still leaves 400 miles that vehicle was driven from the time she left her apartment to the time she was found. And if you're paying attention, you're probably asking, well, Derrick, how far was her apartment from Lambeau Field? So again, you're going to have a map up here if you're watching on YouTube. 2046 August Street in Green Bay is approximately 12 minutes from Lambeau Field. And I don't know exactly where she was at Lambeau, but let's just give or take it 12 to 14 minutes, approximately 6.6 miles. Okay? 6.6 miles. That still leaves 390 plus miles unaccounted for. That's if she traveled 200 miles from the day of her oil change to the day she disappeared, which, as I just said, that's a lot of miles. So that leaves a lot of questions. And this does give some credence to the statement that was made earlier by Nick, Matt's friend, who stated that his girlfriend Sarah potentially saw Amber in Wausau, which is approximately 95 miles away from Green Bay. Now we're starting to get somewhere because if she drove out there and then either she drove back or someone else drove her car back, right there you got 200 miles. Add in a couple other stops and a couple other destinations, and now it makes more sense why that many miles were put on the vehicle. But with this information, with this 600-mile increase in mileage, it opens up so many questions. How long was Amber driving her vehicle? Was she alone? If not, who was she with? Where was she going? Who was she meeting up with? Did she encounter someone before she ever left Green Bay? We don't know. If we had these answers, we probably already have solved this case. So this is really important information because to me, it suggests that Amber wasn't in control of her vehicle for an extended period of time. And I wonder about cameras and witness statements. If somebody else was driving this vehicle, how did it get all the way back to Green Bay without anybody seeing the driver? Or has that person just not came forward yet because of whatever reason? I don't know. But I'm definitely, my mind's spinning right now. My wheels were turning and I'm thinking, man, this is a lot of mileage for someone else to have been driving this vehicle, and yet no one has come forward saying, hey, I saw that vehicle. Not only did I see it, but I saw someone other than Amber driving it. Man, I would love to go back to 1998 and see what was done to try to figure out those answers. So after Amber's vehicle was located, detectives did canvass the area near where the car was found looking for any witnesses, but according to True Crime Daily, no one recalled seeing who had parked the car there. Some people did report, however, that the car hadn't been there before September 28th. And that could make sense. It would align. However, it could just also be faulty witness reporting. We see that all the time. So I don't put too much thought into that September 28th date. I would have to speak to the witnesses directly to develop my opinion on the credibility of that statement. How certain are they that that vehicle was not there? Was their vehicle parked in that exact spot on the 27th, 26th, 25th, 24th? If they can prove that, then sure, you got me. But I would have to see the actual statement or talk to this person myself before locking in that the vehicle wasn't there before the 28th. But if we take them at their word, it could make sense, right? If Amber goes out 100 miles to Wausau and something happens out there, and then the suspect holds on to the vehicle, hides it for a few days, and then brings it back to Lambeau Field knowing that her apartment is nearby, it would make sense, right? They could do it in the middle of the night. They dump the car there, then they walk away in the shadows. So I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's something to consider. We don't want to lock in that the vehicle was dropped there on the 28th because it could be faulty information, but it is something to consider. And now back to Matt, because we have a lot more to talk about when it comes to Matt. After Amber's car was found, detectives wanted to bring him back in for more questioning, and according to True Crime Daily, they asked him to take a polygraph, but he refused. And not long after that, he retained an attorney and stopped speaking with detectives altogether. And you know how I feel about this. I've always said you want to be cooperative with law enforcement, especially if you have no involvement. But it's not a bad thing to have an attorney present. So you can make what you want of this. I know if I took a poll, half of you would say, oh, this means he's guilty. Half of you would say he's not. I don't look too deep into it. If I were Matt and I wasn't involved with anything and I knew where detectives were going with it, maybe I would do the same thing. Because even if you're innocent, we have seen situations where an innocent person can be convicted of a crime they didn't commit. So the less you say, the less likely that's going to happen. So I don't necessarily fault him for this, but it's not going to stop me from speculating on his potential involvement based on the facts we do have. So Matt decides he's not going to speak with law enforcement anymore, but detectives were able to speak with Matt's friend Nick, who I just mentioned, along with Nick's girlfriend Sarah. And they both claimed that Nick had come home from work around 6 p.m. on September 23rd. Nick also said that Matt had told him he had gone to see a movie and had dinner alone after work that evening. After the interviews were over, Nick and Sarah were free to go, but according to court documents that were later released, detectives didn't think anyone in Matt's circle was telling the complete truth. They believed that Amber had been murdered by Matt and Nick had helped him cover it up. Their theory was that Amber's refusal to have an abortion became a breaking point for Matt. He was afraid that his fiancée would find out that the affair and the pregnancy were real, not lies like he claimed, so he killed Amber and disposed of her body with Nick's help. None of this was made public at the time. Detectives only told reporters that they had a person of interest and they suspected foul play. They wouldn't identify who the person of interest was, nor would they confirm that they believed Amber had been murdered. As the months passed, detectives continued to search for her, and they conducted multiple ground searches and digs, including on the Schneider property farm and the construction areas where Matt and Nick worked, but nothing turned up. And without Amber's body and without concrete evidence to support their theory, the case began to stall. But detectives didn't give up, and in 1999, a John Doe hearing was held in Brown County Circuit Court. Now, a John Doe hearing is essentially an independent investigatory tool to determine whether a crime had been committed, and if so, by who. Essentially, an investigative grand jury, same type of thing I've described before. And as far as I know, very few details about this hearing were ever released. What we do know is that Nick and Sarah both testified, though their stories had differed from what they originally told police. According to the Green Bay Press-Gazette, Nick admitted that he most likely had not been home on the night of September 23, 1998, but he couldn't remember where he was or what he was doing. Sarah testified that he wasn't home that night and that she had made several phone calls trying to track him down. Matt's fiancée Heidi also testified, and she said she couldn't recall what Matt had told her he had been doing on September 23rd. And when asked about the relationship with Nick, she explained that she and Matt were planning to marry on January 1st, 2000, and that Nick was going to serve as an usher in the wedding. And just for the record, that wedding later went forward, and Nick and Sarah also eventually married. So congratulations to the happy couples. And as far as the actual hearing, no other information has ever been disclosed, and it wasn't even made public until years later. After the John Doe hearing, the investigation into Amber's disappearance went dormant, but in January of 2013, it was reassigned to new detectives. They decided to start over from the beginning, re-interviewing witnesses and retesting evidence, which is the right move here. It's always the right move when you have new investigators on the case. Matt remained uncooperative, but Nick, on the other hand, agreed to talk. Court documents showed that Nick told detectives he barely knew Matt at the time of Amber's disappearance. They'd only been friends for a few months. He also went on to say that he had, quote, little continued contact with Matt since Matt's wedding to Heidi in 2000. They had only spoken twice, and the most recent was just a couple months earlier. So at that point, detectives say, okay, we're going to call your bluff on that. We're going to see if you're actually telling the truth or if we can poke holes in your story. So they filed subpoenas for both the phone records of Nick and Matt, and what they found is that Matt and Nick had been in contact far more than 2 times. So again, we're catching them in another lie where if they really had nothing to do with this, why would you keep digging this hole? Why wouldn't you just tell the truth? So if you're in the camp that you don't think Nick and Matt are involved, please explain to me, why are they lying about trivial things like how much they've talked since this whole thing happened? What would be the point to that? Do they not know technology exists? Do they not know that investigators have the ability to go back and look at their phone records? When you're thinking about measuring someone's credibility, when they can't even tell the truth about interactions with a person after the crime has occurred, how could you ever believe their reporting on what happened during the crime itself? It's not looking good for Nick or Matt. And detectives didn't stop there because they continued filing various subpoenas throughout 2015, hoping to build up their case. But where I'm sitting right now, no information about what was obtained, if anything at all, has ever been released. However, in 2016, a handful of subpoenas were made public. And for the first time, it was revealed that detectives believed Amber had been killed and that both Matt and Nick were involved. Detective Graff spoke to the Green Bay Press-Gazette and explained that while progress was being made in Amber's case, they didn't have enough evidence to, quote, convince the DA to bring charges. He said, quote, we are still investigating as best as we can. We've reached some obstacles because some individuals have refused to talk with us. And I've broken this down before to you guys. It's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And attorneys, especially the prosecutors, they have an ethical and legal obligation to look at the case. And if they don't honestly believe they could get a conviction, that's where their obligation kicks in to not bring charges. They can't just do it on a whim. They have to look at the evidence being presented by law enforcement and say, yeah, I think if I put this in front of a jury, we could get a conviction. If the answer to that question is no, then they can't go there. They can't do it. And this is something that I've dealt with my whole career, even after being a detective, being in the entertainment space. It's something you face all the time where prosecutors play defense attorneys, and it can be extremely frustrating. And Couple that with the fact that one of your main suspects or persons of interest is refusing to cooperate, it makes it that much more difficult because now you can't catch them in lies, which, as I've said, and I'll acknowledge it publicly, if you are involved, if you have committed the crime, it's better not to speak because you're only going to jam yourself up. So whatever you think about Matt not cooperating, whether he's involved or not, this is the right move for him because he knows, based on what's been released publicly, that detectives don't have enough to charge him. So why would you give them an opportunity to build off something you say? So Matt might not be the sharpest tool in the shed, but clearly he's not that dumb. Unfortunately, the release of these documents or any public attention it may have brought, it didn't lead to any arrests. It didn't change the fact that Matt wasn't speaking. And in 2020, NBC 26 News revisited Amber's case and asked the district attorney why charges have never been filed. And in my opinion, he gave a pretty vague answer, saying that the absence of a body can make the case difficult, but then he went on to say that it doesn't make it impossible. So which one is it? Can you do it or can you not do it? And all the things that we know publicly, it already seems like there's some pretty good circumstantial evidence here. So make up your mind. What is it? Are you thinking about doing this or are you not? So I wasn't satisfied with the answer, but where I'm sitting, I'm usually not. So maybe I'm a bad measurement to go off of. Detective Graff also spoke with NBC, emphasizing that someone out there knows the truth about what happened to Amber. And he said that person has the power to change everything, to be a hero for Amber's family if they would just come forward and tell them what they know. Unfortunately, that person has yet to contact detectives. Amber is still missing, and no one has been charged with her murder. But detectives and Amber's family have made it very clear they will not give up till they bring her home where she belongs. All right, let's dive into this perspective, and there's so much I could cover here. I don't want to be redundant, but even when I was writing this down, I went on forever, and at this point, I'm looking at it, and it almost seems like I'm a serial killer, the way I'm reading this. It's a lie. It doesn't make sense. It makes sense in my brain, but not on paper. So I'm going to try to translate this into something that you'll be able to follow. So I want to break it down into 4 potential scenarios. And there could be more. These are just the ones that rise to the top for me. And I'm going to start with the least likely because I don't want to really spend too much time on it. And that would be this was some premeditated thing that Amber had been planning. She wanted to disappear. She wasn't enjoying her life. So she staged this whole thing to disappear and take off and be on her own. She didn't want to be with her family. She didn't want to be around Matt. And she was going to have this baby and just live her own life. She was going to leave her university, going to leave her only support system with her family, and going to be a single mother with no life experience and just do this all on her own. Put your hand up if you think that's what happened here. There should be nobody. So that's number 1. The second one would be, and could be a good explanation as to why we haven't solved this case. Actually, these next 2 scenarios would be that while she was driving somewhere, whatever that was, a gas station, a convenience store, the car wash, whatever it was to pick up some groceries, could be a million different things. Someone out there spotted her, someone that we haven't identified, someone who was innately a bad person and was looking for a victim of opportunity. I talk about it all the time. And they saw her alone, maybe going back to her car. And for some reason, we have no documentation or evidence of this, but she was in a public place that was seen by other people. And this individual or individuals were able to get the drop on her, shove her in her vehicle, and take off with her and then dump her vehicle days later after driving it around for hundreds of miles. And I would believe this more if it wasn't for the 600 unaccounted for miles, because this is somewhat similar to Jennifer Kesse, especially if we consider the third scenario, which is she didn't really drive anywhere. She was going somewhere close, and when she left her apartment complex, someone who wasn't just a random person, but a resident of the apartment complex or a friend of a resident of the apartment complex or someone who worked there had been watching her for a while, knew she was alone, and on this particular night, when she came outside, they attacked her and pushed her into her vehicle. And that's where I'm coming up with the similarities to Jennifer Kesse. That would be a similar set of circumstances. I personally and professionally do not believe that's what happened. And there's a variety of reasons for that. And I'm not going to name anybody specifically right now. I'm just going to talk about what we have. First off, we know that she had been injured earlier in the day, so I don't think she would have left her house or was planning on leaving her house unless something came up that she felt was important. Someone she had to go meet, something she had to get, even though she probably wasn't in the best condition to drive. She just had that concussion. She had planned on staying in for the night. She had told her father, Steve, that. So why would she suddenly leave her home after this phone call? Now, this phone call is not necessarily connected, but it does seem like an odd set of circumstances for it to have no weight in this case. But for whatever reason, she decides to leave her apartment later that evening after all of this happened during the day, knowing she had doctor's appointments and class the next morning. So that's one thing that doesn't make sense unless it's someone that she knows and something that's important to her and cannot be handled over the phone. That's our first thing. The second thing is that her vehicle had these 600 miles. I think it's reasonable to assume that if she did leave her apartment that night, under these circumstances, with this current condition, the concussion, she wasn't driving 500, 600 miles around Wisconsin for no reason. She had a destination. She had someone that she was going to meet that would have been this far away. So now you have a couple things. You have someone who was important to her, a topic that matters to her, and it's important enough where she would be willing to drive a decent distance to meet up with this person and talk about this topic, even after getting in a car accident only a few hours earlier. Those are the things that you have to think about when you're considering the why. Why would she voluntarily leave her apartment to go somewhere? What would be the parameters that would dictate to her this was important enough to do so? And that's what I've deduced from it. Someone that mattered, someone who was close to her and had information or had a topic that she was interested in and wanted to discuss, and someone that was worth driving an extended period of time to get to. So those are things you have to consider when you're thinking about a person that would fit those categories. We're going to come back to that. Now fast forward to the vehicle being found. The car was unlocked. The purse was in the trunk, which would make sense. She would have had the purse in the trunk even if she left her apartment voluntarily. The keys were in the ignition. That wouldn't make sense. You wouldn't leave your keys in the ignition in a public area unless whoever dumped that car there did it intentionally. And it was unlocked, right? You also have to remember, you're going to leave your keys in the ignition unlocked in a public area, and you're just going to hope that it doesn't get stolen. Those factors lead me to believe that it was someone other than Amber who dumped the vehicle at that location 6.6 miles away from her apartment. If we're to believe that her vehicle traveled hundreds of miles before being dumped, let's say out to Wausau or somewhere else in that same radius, if she had met someone out there who wasn't familiar with her, someone that was just a random person, and this was just a victim of opportunity situation where this suspect didn't know who Amber was prior to attacking her, how would they know where she lived? How would they know to dump her vehicle 12 minutes from her apartment? Are they just that lucky? In all the places they could have dumped her car, why was it dumped so close to her home? To me, that was someone who deliberately left the car at that location to give the illusion that it was Amber who left her car there, that it's possible Amber was at this location and was attacked by some random offender. But that would mean that this person, whoever they are, knew Amber and knew where she lived. So this is another box that needs to be checked for whoever this suspect is. And let's recap that. Someone who was important to her, that would have information that would get her to leave the house, wasn't close to her at the time of her disappearance, and would know where she resided and where to dump the car so it would at least look like Amber could have left the car there herself. The things this person didn't consider was not putting the vehicle seat back into the proper position and the odometer. They wouldn't have known that Amber just had a reading of her mileage 2 days prior. So therefore, they probably go into this situation thinking, I drove the car for hundreds of miles, but there's no way detectives are going to know because there's no documentation of what the mileage was before Amber went missing. This is where detectives got lucky and the suspect didn't. So when we consider all of those factors and how they relate to our suspect, is there anybody we can think of that would check those boxes? And I'm not trying to be sarcastic here. Let's look at it objectively. And let's talk about Matt Schneider. Was he important to Amber? Unfortunately, yes. Did he have information that would be critical to Amber's life? The whole fact that he wanted this abortion but was trying to meet up with her, maybe she thought he had changed his mind. Check that box. Was he working out in Wausau at the time, approximately 100 miles away, where Nick's girlfriend Sarah allegedly saw Amber driving her Subaru? Check that box. Did he know where Amber lived? We know he did because he went back to her apartment. So he knew exactly where she lived and how close Lambeau Field would have been to her apartment. Now let's talk about the physical evidence of the car. The seat was pushed all the way back, and we know that Matt was approximately 6 feet 5 inches tall, according to Amber. So all those boxes have been checked. And then there's something else we haven't talked about. The fact that Matt stopped calling Amber after the 23rd. This reminds me of another case, Heyman Lee, also known as the Adnan Syed case. As many of you know from Crime Weekly, I believe Adnan's guilty. And I believe a lot of his behavior with his phone records suggests that. This was something where before anybody knew Heyman Lee was missing, Adnan had already conducted some behavior that would suggest he was aware of her disappearance and her murder before anybody else. This is also an indication here that maybe, at this point, Matt was already aware that if he had called Amber or contacted her in any way, she wasn't going to answer him. And as I alluded to earlier, at this point, early in the investigation, especially on the 23rd, no one knew about Amber's disappearance other than her father, potentially her mother and some other friends and family, and a few officers at the police station because it wasn't publicly reported at this point. So how would Matt know this? Well, I would want to ask Steve if he reached out to Matt or if anybody else reached out to Matt or if law enforcement had reached out to Matt. And if the answers to those questions are all no, then my question to Matt would be, how did you know? How often were you calling Amber before the 23rd? And was this out of character for you not to contact her on the 23rd, the 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th, or the 28th? And this would be something we could easily go back and look at. You look at his phone records. If he was calling her daily up to that point and then abruptly stopped, that's a red flag. And if he was only calling her every couple weeks, then it's something you could rule out. But if I had to take a guess, I would say that Matt was calling her pretty consistently, and this would be something that you would be able to confirm by phone records and her diary. So again, Amber's her own key witness in her case. So obviously this doesn't look good for Matt, and it doesn't look good for Nick either because neither of them can provide an alibi for where they were on the night of September 23rd, and that's a problem. And I think that's one of the reasons law enforcement believes that they are involved with this whole case, and I can't disagree with them. However, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't acknowledge that there could be another reason why this case hasn't been solved in 27 years. It's because we're all looking in the wrong direction. Even though a lot of the stars align against Matt and Nick, maybe that's just an unfortunate set of circumstances. Is there someone else in Amber's life that we haven't looked into yet, that hasn't been vetted, that may have had information about Amber or had a relationship with Amber that she didn't document, that maybe lived at the apartment and wouldn't have called her? I don't think this is the case, but I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge it. Because there are many cases where law enforcement believes they quote unquote have their guy, and 10, 15, 20 years later, we find out that it wasn't them and it was someone else all along. So I really hope that even though the evidence is incriminating against Matt and Nick, we continue to look for alternate theories. Because if we get tunnel vision, we could be blinded to the person who's actually responsible for Amber's disappearance and potential death. And that would be a disservice to not only Amber, her family, but also Matt and Nick. We need to find the person responsible for everyone involved, which, as always, leads me to you guys. We need someone to come forward after seeing or hearing this episode, and that relies on you guys sharing the story. Even if you don't have information that can help solve it, maybe you know someone who does. So just to recap, on the evening of September 23rd, 1998, 19-year-old Amber Wilde, who was 4.5 months pregnant, spoke to her father from her apartment landline, and she was never heard from again. The next day, her father drove to her Green Bay apartment and found it locked, with both her purse and car missing. On October 1st, her silver Subaru was discovered abandoned near Lambeau Field, but Amber was nowhere to be found. Her case has since been ruled a homicide, but her remains have never been recovered. If you or anyone you know has information about this case, please contact Crime Stoppers at 920-432-7867. As always, my final words go out to the friends and family of Amber, specifically Steve and Julie. I know as parents, you guys are going to continue fighting for your daughter. I think we all would. We need to find out what happened. As I just said a few moments ago, not only for Amber, not only for you, but for everyone involved, and that includes Matt and Nick. If they're not involved, we need to clear their name. And if they are, we need to hold them accountable. We're obviously not there yet. We need more information. I'm hoping that investigators are also looking at advancements in science and technology to reanalyze the DNA and fingerprints that were obtained and received during the time when this incident occurred. If that hasn't been done, it needs to be done. That is the best chance we have at solving this case. And we also need someone who's watching or listening to come forward so that we can go forward with any new leads that come forward. I'll also send a message out to Nick. Nick, if you're listening or watching this and you know what happened, I can't speak for law enforcement, and I know many years have passed, but it's not too late. If you were somehow involved and you want to clear your conscience and give Amber's family the justice they deserve, you can still come forward. Maybe there's a deal to be had. Do the right thing, not only for yourself, but for Amber. And if anybody does come forward and there are new developments, as always, I will share them with you guys immediately. Until then, everyone, please stay safe out there, and I'll see you soon.